The Daisy ad is the most revolutionary advertisement in history. It has shifted the campaign landscape to favor attack ads, and its frightening legacy threatens voters today. For nearly 100 years, elections had been dominated by singular candidates who had demonstrated their aptitude during the war and solidified their standing using campaign surrogates. By their standards, it was inappropriate to campaign. However, the rise of political parties forced a change to this attitude. Americans remained divided. Some felt it was nice to interact with the candidates themselves, while others believed that future presidents were above campaigning. The 1840 election marked the commencement of campaigning on a grand scale. William Henry Harrison led a large campaign appealing to the common man suffering at the hand of the wealthy Martin Van Buren, to which the Democrats had little defense. At first, voting was limited to the white male population. However, as voting rights expanded to black males and women, political campaigns adapted to appeal to previously marginalized groups. As campaigning increased, new techniques became popularized, such as campaign songs, rallies, candidate advertisements on products like cigarettes, etc. The stump speech was popular during the first campaigns, as grand events were not yet organized. Instead, candidates addressed local citizens and increased voter contact. During the 19th and 20th centuries, political media alliances and mudslinging also began through broadsides and the penny press. During the Gilded Age, parties began garnering donations for their costly campaigns, which attempted to sell candidates to a certain class. Meanwhile, candidates began using the radio for advertising, as its prevalence grew due to a decreased cost. During the 1924 election, campaign conventions were broadcasted, and people tuned in to hear about the goals of a candidate. In the 1932 election, Herbert Hoover spent 20% of his marketing budget on radio broadcasts, while Franklin Roosevelt's use of the radio reinforced the positive perception of him. In the 1952 election, the TV overshadowed the radio and became candidates' primary campaign medium. Dwight D. Eisenhower hired an advertising firm to create the first campaign advertisement aired in the U.S. The ad focused on Eisenhower answering America's concerns and his goals. Eisenhower also addressed the largely ignored female vote by featuring women in his campaign. Critics such as Stevenson II accused Eisenhower of selling the presidency like cereal. The political advertisements during the Kennedy-Nixon election similarly focused on individual campaign goals. However, this advertisement attacking Nixon's contributions in White House decisions was released, marking the commencement of negative campaigning.
I just wondered if you could give us an example of a major idea of his that you had adopted in that role as the decider and final. If you give me a week, I might think of one.
However, physical appearance during TV debates was a determining factor of the election, not advertisements. Nevertheless, the TV proved to have a heavy weight. The Cold War and the recent Cuban Missile Crisis inspired fear of nuclear proliferation in the hearts of Americans. Children in schools were taught duck and cover techniques, yet there remained no protection from the deadly radiation. When asked in 1965 if students ages 9 through 16 felt a war would break out, 50% agreed. Many older participants felt fallout shelters were inadequate, and all were interested in the war. Another 1963 study found wealthier children were more detailed in their discussion of the possibility of war. However, poor children still expressed a very dark, hopeless picture of what would ensue.
Though some still felt that the arms race created security within America as it did in World War II, many felt critical of the bomb on humanitarian and religious grounds.
Of the death of over 100,000 people and the injury of a comparable number, you naturally don't think of that as with ease.
This fear of nuclear weaponry infiltrated pop culture in music, film, and novels. In the 1964 election, Lyndon B. Johnson and Barry Goldwater went head-to-head. LBJ led a negative campaign of Barry Goldwater, targeting a weakness in Goldwater's platform, his readiness to use nuclear weapons.
In the defense of liberty is no vice.
And appealed to the universal motivator, fear. The Daisy ad almost didn't air, but the head of the producing agency, Doyle Dan Burbank, begged LBJ to air it. He believed in the supremacy of emotional advertising and a new era of campaigning, no longer advertising like cereal. Tony Schwartz, the ad's creator, crafted the ad using resonance theory, which is the idea that when people view media, they bring outside information. Schwartz used little text to perpetuate viewer speculation that it was Goldwater's voice signifying impending doom. It reminded people of Goldwater's declared willingness to use nuclear weapons, branding him as a reckless war hawk who would ruin the nation. Simply put, it was one of the earliest and most innovative takes on negative advertising as it drew on fear. Some Republicans felt the fear-mongering of voters was unacceptable and were appalled at the advertisement. Still, Johnson won the election by a margin of 20%, the fifth largest in history. Subsequent ads between 1964 and 1976 featured less of the political candidates themselves, instead using symbols or testimony from others, and often copying Daisy, some almost exactly. An example of this is ads during the 1968 election cycle. Richard Nixon, the Republican candidate, favored the use of nuclear weapons during the heat of the Vietnam War. Democrat Party ads negatively advertised this policy using an identical background explosion. Nixon's campaign countered this by depicting the dark future should the Democrats enter office. Similarly to the Daisy ad, both parties used fear to push voters away. Even their campaign slogans insinuate that a wrong vote could have ended the world as it was. Research during this era also found that emotion plays a major and likely dominant role in presidential candidate evaluation and decision-making, illuminating the effectiveness of Daisy's campaign revolution. Though the wartime period was over, attack advertising continued as campaigns progressed to more extreme and graphic ads. In 1988, an unprecedented amount of negative advertisements were released, and earlier than ever seen before. This ad, funded by George W. Bush, appealed to Americans' flourishing fear of crime, insinuating that Democrats would damage the justice system, their only protection. Later in the 2012 cycle, Mitt Romney released this advertisement, which degrades a future with Obama, his competitor, to something from a horror film. The Daisy ad implied harm. However, advertisements like this highlight the transition to explicitly graphic techniques. Even those who wished to campaign positively were forced to counter negative attacks with their own offenses. And the close election of 2012 pushed Republicans to spend 2/3 of their money on negative advertising and viciously target other Democrat Party members. The impact on voters is detrimental. Devout party members feel increased negativity towards members of the other party, while moderate voters feel forced to pick between two extremes. If moderates feel unwelcome, less people will vote, destroying American democracy. Adversaries still concede that negative advertising provokes dissatisfaction and negativity towards the government. The question is, does the effectiveness of negative advertising outweigh the consequences? Nevertheless, the Daisy ad remains the revolution that threatens democracy.